Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so happy you could be here with us today to discuss multiple sclerosis and diet. And we're hoping to get some of your questions answered. My name is Mona Bostic. I'm a registered dietitian and a certified multiple sclerosis specialist. I have a private practice in Greensboro, North Carolina, where I'm fortunate to work with people living with multiple sclerosis.
And I'm Jessica Gelman. I'm also a registered dietitian. I work for the Center for MS at the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City. I also have a private practice in the New York City area. Thanks for joining us.
Fantastic. Let me see if I can't. There we go.
So this is just a page to touch on some of the subjects we'll be talking about today. We'll be talking about what's the best diet for MS? What are some foods to limit or avoid with MS? What about alcohol and MS? Are there supplements to take if you have MS? And can we manage symptoms through diet? So these are some questions Mona and I have both gotten in our practices, and we wanted to talk to you about them today.
Absolutely. So the first question, well, it's not so much a question as I'm going to provide some background to some of the answers that are going to be coming ahead. Often when we talk about diet and multiple sclerosis, we are focused sort of narrowed in on what I call the micro view. But because within the field of nutrition science, MS nutrition is a very specific and micro view. And sometimes when you just stay within that very narrow scope of view, you lack some important context. So zooming out a little bit to a more macro view or the big picture, so to speak, can really help to clear up some of the confusion that's out there around this topic. And one of the questions is there a consensus on the role of nutrition in helping folks with multiple sclerosis? It's really important to remember that compared to the amount of research investigating the role of nutrition in human health, the study of nutrition in multiple sclerosis is still relatively new, actually quite new. I mean, they've begun studying it, but very new. The consensus that does exist on the role of nutrition in human health can be found in the dietary guidelines for Americans. And one of the important things to realize about this information is that decades and decades of research have gone into to inform the recommendations made by the dietary guidelines. And there are some who might disagree with some of the how do I say this? Some of the lobbying or what have you around what constitutes a food group and things of that sort. And that's a different conversation because the science behind the recommendations made by the guidelines speak only to the nutrients that help to support human health. There's a variety of ways for you to obtain those nutrients through a variety of different foods. The next question that comes up out of this is that there, as it relates to that big stack of research there is no consensus that exists on the role of diet in the MS disease process. That's a full stop. There's no research to indicate that living with multiple sclerosis alters the nutrient requirements in humans. There are many complementary providers out there who promote diets that purport to be beneficial for folks with MS. Questions remain as to the efficacy or necessary adoption of these diets. Are they supported by science at all? And Jessica's going to run through a few of those right now.
So despite what Mona just shared, if you Google what's the best diet for MS, you will see a lot of different things come up. And so I wanted to list here some of the diets promoted for MS, if you were to Google that phrase. So you can see here the paleo diet. There's a spin-off of the paleo diet called the Walls Protocols, has some similarities. That one I hear about a lot in my practice from patients. The McDougall diet, the ketogenic diet, often used with the last, diet sort of promoted on this list, intermittent fasting, which would be cycles of fasting and non-fasting. So sometimes those are used together. The gluten-free diet, which eliminates gluten from the diet. The swank diet, also something I hear a lot about. And then the Mediterranean diet, which is a diet that encourages whole grains, fruits, vegetables, legumes, herbs, spices, nuts, healthy fats, and limiting some red meat and sweets. So I would say this is the most flexible of the diets listed here, and also quite similar to the dietary guidelines for Americans that Mona just spoke about. So, it's interesting sort of to look at this list. It could be very confusing if you're someone who is just researching how should I eat for MS, and all of these things come up, as a lot of them sort of are in opposition to one another. But, if you look at some of the things they do have in common, something like vegetables is a commonly recommended food across all of these. So, so let's talk now. Mona's going to tell you a little bit more about what's out there.
Thanks, Jess. Um, so again, you may have seen some of the diets that Jessica just went through, talking about what diet is the best one for people with MS. And before I get into any specifics of the things that Jessica was mentioning, let's ask another question. It depends. How are you eating now? What changes are you considering? And what outcomes are you looking for? It's important to remember that the food we eat, have three primary roles: to provide energy in the form of calories, to contribute to body structure in the form of cells, muscles, organs, bones. Everything in us comes from the foods that we eat. And they also regulate chemical processes in the body, like metabolism, nerve transmission, which is already a little bumpy in those of us with MS, fluid balance, muscle contraction, and so much more. So when it comes to eating food, the dietary guidelines for Americans have provided extensive resources and lists and recommendations for foods that humans can eat to obtain the nutrients required for our bodies to operate optimally. And if you look at it from a population perspective, we as Americans are not doing such a great job at meeting those intake recommendations. Everything on this image here in blue, we as a population are falling way below the intake recommendations for things that are intended to help keep us healthy and prevent chronic disease. There are a few things that we as a population overconsume. I think we know what they are, and those are the things that all the bandwidth, the nutrition messaging is about: avoid added sugars, don't eat saturated fats. And these are all good things. This is good guidance. It's not the most important guidance, because if you can see everything in blue, we need to be eating more of. So I am an advocate for a message of addition. Let's see if we can't find health promoting foods to add to our plates in a more consistent way. But I've already said that there is no therapeutic diet for multiple sclerosis. However, one of the things that's really important to remember as somebody living with multiple sclerosis, that if you have a comorbid chronic health condition, like one of the ones listed here on this screen, then what you have is multiple sclerosis and a comorbidity. And comorbidity is associated with an increase in, comorbidity in folks with multiple sclerosis is associated with an increase in disability and a decrease in quality of life. So eating and moving your body and engaging in other health promoting behaviors in such a way that will help you to either manage these conditions, should you have one, or prevent getting one if you don't already have one, is ideal. So going back to that question of what is the best diet for multiple sclerosis, it's twofold. One, an eating pattern which doesn't really require a title, which is why I've got that in air quotes, that includes the nutrients recommended by the dietary guidelines that provide our bodies with the three primary roles we need, the three primary things we need to get from food. That's number one. And number two, if you have a comorbid health condition like hypertension or osteoporosis, and you're unfamiliar with how food impacts the management of that condition, then it's really important for you to learn that, to obtain that knowledge. So if you are thinking all this time, oh, I've been eating for multiple sclerosis, not hypertension, not cardiovascular disease, I would urge you to flip that script a little bit. And as a person living with multiple sclerosis, eating to manage or prevent comorbidities is a far more important nutrition goal than eating for multiple sclerosis. And again, that has to do with health-related quality of life, which is a multidimensional concept, including domains related to physical, mental, emotional, and social functioning. And it focuses on the impact that health status has on quality of life. So your health status has an impact on how well you live with multiple sclerosis. So be sure to put that in your thought process when you're struggling with, but I have multiple sclerosis. I need to eat for multiple sclerosis. And because I'm telling you, unfortunately at this time, and again, research is ongoing, but at this time, there is no diet or nutrient that you can eat enough of or abstain entirely that will impact the MS disease process. And again, regardless of what you choose to refer to your eating pattern as, a health promoting eating pattern is going to be one that includes a variety of colorful vegetables and fruits, a variety of lean proteins, beans, legumes, nuts, seeds, whole grains, more often than not whole grains, heart healthy, unsaturated fats, low fat calcium foods. Dairy products happen to be an excellent source of calcium. If you choose to abstain from dairy products, just make sure your dairy alternative is fortified with vitamin D and calcium, while limiting saturated fats, sodium, added sugars, and highly refined foods. The only thing that broadly we all as a population have to avoid entirely are trans fats. And those are fats that they took out to replace saturated fats, but it turns out they were actually worse than the original. So most foods have the process. I mean, the creation of the manufacturing of these foods have removed trans fats from their processes, but it's important to be aware of that. And then finally, it's important that we not forget about variety, balance, and flexibility. Those are the true super words as it relates to making sure that we get everything we need on a daily basis. And just a few resources from the folks who created the dietary guidelines. There's all that stack of research that you saw on that other slide, which was the science, the research that informs these things. And then if you may be familiar with the Choose My Plate, which is the image on the left side of the screen, it helps to inform you as to how to build a healthy plate on a consistent basis. And again, I point out that little dairy circle doesn't have to be dairy as long as your dairy alternative is fortified with vitamin D and calcium. In the center, you can see a free downloadable resource from the myplate.gov website that it provides you a plan. Like, these are the things that you might want to eat over the course of a day, and not specifics, but categories of food, as well as pointing out the limitations on salt, fats, and added sugars. And for those of you who really do well with checklists, this is also it's available in a checklist form. For those of you who prefer your resources to be digital, going to the Start Simple with My Plate app, it includes everything available on the left of the screen in virtual form. You can see that it has a goals dashboard, so you can select a goal for yourself or allow the app to select a goal for you. And then you can track your progress towards that goal over the course of a week. And if you're somebody who really likes that instant gratification of awards, you get You get gold stars and stickers and stuff that really feel wonderful for it's a pat on the back, for when you've met your goal. But in addition to that, there's a lot of resources there's recipes and shopping resources, and it really integrates well with other uh, apps like grocery store apps and things of that nature. So all of these things are free. They are all based on that same consensus of research that goes into developing the dietary guidelines. So I strongly encourage you to look them up and check them out.
I just want to co-sign. It's a wonderful resource, so definitely check it out. So another question commonly asked: should people with MS quit or avoid certain foods? So, as Mona mentioned, we want to be more additive and think of what can we include, but I'd be remiss if we didn't address this too. Next. All right. So here are some foods when possible to try to limit, keyword limit. High sodium foods, which was touched on previously, um, foods with, excessive added sugars, even sugar alcohols, um, foods that are high in saturated in trans fats, um, alcohol, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and refined carbohydrates. So that would be things like white bread, pastries, crackers. Now, the key phrase here, as I mentioned, was when possible. And so I just want to, note that sometimes these things are not able to be completely avoided, and that's okay. So, Mona, the next slide, please. So I put here the diet is an average. So again, if most of the time you can try to eat in the pattern that Mona mentioned, and you do the best you can, and sometimes you want to have some foods that are on this list, that's okay, right? We think of it as an average. So it won't make a big difference if these things find their way in occasionally. And I think the key to long-term success with a healthy diet is really sort of accepting that it's okay, but you're never going to be 100% perfect, quote unquote, perfect all the time.
And perfect is boring, I'd just like to say, but
Yeah, it is boring. All right. So I just want to mention, because I get this asked about this a lot. What about gluten? What about dairy? What about soy? What about eggs? And many other specific foods that, if you remember back on the slide with other diets promoted for MS, may be eliminated in some of these other diets. And so the answer to that is we don't have evidence to say that any of these need to be avoided. And actually, if we go to the next slide. You can see here in this small study that dairy and gluten didn't have any effect with disease activity or quality of life in people with MS. So, these foods do not need to be avoided. And, of course, everybody's different. If you notice when you eat some of these foods, you don't feel well, or there's, you have some sort of response that, that this doesn't agree with you, then listen to your body and don't have them. But if it's a question I get, sometimes I feel fine when I eat these. Do I have to cut them out? And the answer is no.
I would actually, I'm going to go back real quick and point out one thing that's important. Jessica says if you eat something and it doesn't agree with you, that you or it's totally fine to abstain from anything that doesn't sit well, but be mindful that not every symptom that comes from a food is related to MS. So if you have a problem with a food and it's more than just that oh, I ate too much ice cream feeling, it's important to maybe mention that to your doctor because there could be other things going on. So
A great point.
you can have food allergies and other things along with multiple sclerosis. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out. So sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great point. Another question I get, can I drink alcohol if I have MS? So I want to talk to you about maybe some of the effects of alcohol on the next slide. All right, so alcohol may increase your risk of comorbidities. It can have a negative impact on balance, coordination, and your sleep. So you can have slower reaction times when you've been drinking, reduced inhibitions. It alcohol is a bladder irritant. So if you struggle with urinary frequency or urgency, this may not be helpful to you. Um, it can interfere with some medications and also depress the central nervous system. So kind of slow your brain activity and neural communication. Long-term effects of alcohol use can contribute to neuropathy and cognitive decline. Um, but again, as I mentioned before, diet's an average. And so, in moderation, if this is something you want to partake in, I would say just to be mindful of how much you're having. Drink responsibly.
I will just add to that something that a neurologist once said to me in reference to alcohol consumption by folks with MS. His recommendation was that you think of it as people with MS showing up to the party with one drink on board. One drink on board as it relates to balance and cognitive function and inhibition and all those things. So choose accordingly, with the idea that you may have already had one drink on board in that respect. So I thought that was a really good, it's very easy to remember that. And that's why I like that. But,
A good way to put it.
and supplements, that's another question I get a lot of. In fact, I've had a number of people reach out to me wanting to know, I was just diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. What supplements do I need to begin taking? And my response to that is, it depends. Are you clinically deficient in something? Or is your eating pattern? And I say eating pattern because maybe you've been following one of those very restrictive MS diets, and maybe because your diet is so restrictive, you're not getting very important nutrients. And so those nutrients need to be obtained somehow. And you might notice that coincidentally, the promoters of these diets are happy to also sell you supplements so that you do get those important nutrients. I will let you be the judge of whether that's an ethical thing or not. But it's important to remember a couple of things. Herbal remedies and things of that sort are not nutritionally necessary at all. When it comes to vitamins and minerals, if you are clinically deficient as diagnosed by a physician after having done a blood test, or if your eating pattern is deficient. And another way to think of a deficient eating pattern might be if you are a vegan. If you're a vegan, then your diet, your eating pattern does not contain foods that provide vitamin B12. So you will need to supplement your eating pattern with that nutrient, and a vitamin or supplement is a great way to do that. Same thing with calcium supplements. If you have osteoporosis and you need to supplement your intake with calcium, vitamin D and calcium, supplements are an excellent way to do that. It's important to remember, though, that more is not better. I've had people that I work with taking enormously high doses of things that is not a good idea. So stick within the recommended daily allowance or recommended intake of that nutrient, and make sure that your entire team, and what I mean by that is that make sure whether you have a primary care doctor, a neurologist, endocrinologist, an obstetrician, make sure everyone is aware of the supplements you're taking and any over-the-counter products, because these products can and do interact with medications, and it's important that they're aware that you're taking them and in what dose. The other thing to be mindful of is that supplements are not regulated. They may or may not contain what the label claims it contains, and they may contain ingredients that are not found on the label, gluten being a common one. So if you do have celiac disease and are abstaining from gluten for serious reasons, you're going to want to know if a product has gluten in it. And if you'll see over here on the side of the screen, the USP label, that is a third person certification system. They test and verify that the supplements that contain the label, as you can see right there, they test and verify that the product that contains that label contains what it claims to contain and does not contain ingredients not found in there. Another resource for this information is the consumerlab.com, which is another third-party testing service. They don't put a label on the product, but you can go, they offer a lot of information for free, as well as they have I believe it's $35 a year-ish for a newsletter to get a ton of information about supplements. The other thing that's really important is that Nature Made, many of us with multiple sclerosis are deficient in vitamin D and do take a vitamin D supplement. So it's important to know that A, it contains what it's supposed to, but also it's affordable and it's accessible. Most Nature Made is found at many grocery stores, Target, Walmart. It's easy to get, and it doesn't require a second mortgage on your house to purchase this in the quantity required. So again, supplements are meant to supplement food and do it in a safe way. So that's my advice on that. But again, really make sure that everyone on your care team is aware of everything that you are taking.
Another question, can diet help potentially manage or improve some MS symptoms? And the answer is yes. I think that while there's no diet for MS, there are ways we can help potentially some of these symptoms that folks may be experiencing through diet. So let's see the next slide and we can talk about that some more. So a healthy diet may impact your energy level, potentially giving you more energy. Your digestion, helping in that area, can help with your sleep, can help manage potentially your risk of chronic disease, your immune system, your bone health, mental health, and more. And let me just point out, can a healthy diet may help these areas, and then a diet that maybe is not so healthy can negatively impact as well. So I just wanted to touch on a couple of specific examples here that I work with patients on. So, constipation, depending what the root cause is, of course, but in some cases, patients who struggle with constipation associated with MS, we work on making sure they're getting enough fiber, getting enough hydration, making sure they move their body in a safe way. And make sure that they're getting probiotics in their diet through fermented foods. And again, it depends on the cause for the constipation, but this is just one example. Fatigue, a common MS symptom a lot of my patients experience. For fatigue, we would make sure patients are not skipping meals. Make sure that they're eating at regular intervals throughout the day. And try to make sure their diet is balanced, making sure they're getting enough protein, healthy fat, and fiber to keep them full and satisfied and energetic from their food.
That brings us to the end of our conversation today, and this is certainly not every question that I'm sure you have to ask and hopefully be answered. But Jessica and I were very happy to be here today to try to answer some of your questions.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much.